Breathtaking landscapes, vast plains sweeping up into the last snow-topped peaks of the Andes. This is the Tierra del Fuego, the land of fire. For most travelers, this island, situated on the southern tip of South America, is synonymous with the ends of the earth. Ushuaia, the Argentine capital of the Tierra del Fuego, stretches out lazily along the shores of the Beagle Channel. The town, founded as a penal colony less than a century ago, has changed a great deal since. Once they had exterminated the Yamana Indians who had been living on this land for thousands of years, the sheep raisers, gold prospectors, and adventurers of all stripes forged this pioneer town piece by piece. There are now close to 50,000 inhabitants. Fishermen have now replaced the sheep raisers. In the cold, rich waters of the South Atlantic and Pacific, they pull in thousands of tons of fish that they export to Buenos Aires, Europe, and Japan. Ushuaia, now a popular travel destination, attracts as many hikers who've come to discover the Tierra del Fuego National Park as ordinary tourists. But in the past few years, Ushuaia has become more than merely the southernmost town on Earth. It is now the port of departure to an even more extreme destination, a fascinating destination because it's so difficult to get to: Antarctica. Le Diamant, a small cruise boat, is a regular visitor to the Chilean fjords and the Tierra del Fuego. But now, for the first time, the captain is going to strike out for Antarctica. Leaving Ushuaia, we sail along the middle of the Beagle Channel, which marks the boundary between Argentina and the Chilean part of the Tierra del Fuego. High mountains on either shore, we advance through the calm waters of this former glacial valley. We reach Cape Horn in a few hours. Leaving behind us the legendary cliff, we enter into the icy waters that separate South America from Antarctica. To make the best use of the long days at sea before setting foot on the continent of Antarctica, lecturers inform the passengers and brief them on the many facets of this extraordinary voyage.
Donc voilà une reproduction d'un groupe de ces fameux Indiens Yamana, tels que les explorateurs français, l'expédition de la Romanche en 1882, a pu les observer.
Deuxième pilote débarqué.
At nightfall, the pilots who came aboard in the Beagle Channel leave the ship on the patrol boat of the Chilean Coast Guard. We're entering international waters, and their mission is over. For us, this is the beginning of a new voyage. 2 days at sea to cross the formidable Drake Passage. Few boats sail to Antarctica. They have to have a reinforced hull, have Zodiac boats to go ashore. They have to enlist specialists to navigate through the ice floes and specialized Antarctic guides. But above all, they have to respect the regulations established by the IATO, the International Association of Antarctic Tour Operators. The first of these rules limits the number of people that can disembark at the same time on a given site to 100.
You will be on VHF or UHF?
That's why the captain has called a meeting in his cabin with the co-captain, the security lieutenant, the IATO inspector, but also John, the head of the expedition, Marie, the head of the French guides, and Jerome, the cruise director.
Much of Antarctica isn't really known, even by the captains and by some of the companies, travel companies, that take ships down there. When any ship goes, there are no ports of call, no piers, no towns or villages, nothing of that sort. There are the odd base scientific research station here and there. I've had the experience to come down here for 15 years almost and explore lots of the small nooks and crannies, lots of the little coves, the islands. And because of that experience, I've come to know the places that's good to take guests and fellow travelers.
Even though today's ships are outfitted with the very latest equipment and technology, navigating in Antarctica is still an adventure. However, we are a long way from the extreme conditions of the first expeditions. Those of the Belgian Adrien de Gerlache, the Swede Otto Nordenskjöld, the Englishman Ernest Shackleton, or the Frenchman Jean-Baptiste Charcot. It's easy to forget that, for the most part, these expeditions took place between 1898 and 1916. That is less than 100 years ago. But for those exceptional men, Antarctica was still an untouched continent at the time, a world waiting to be discovered. The first men, however, to take notice of these regions of the extreme south were neither scientists nor explorers. They were seal hunters and whalers. From the beginning of the 19th century on, after sailing down the southern coast of Chile, they entered into Drake Passage, thus opening one of the 3 Antarctic exploration routes.
The most natural routes to reach Antarctica in the history of research and conquest have been the route from New Zealand to the Ross Sea. I'm thinking mainly of the explorers Scott and Shackleton. And then the route from Hobart in Tasmania that takes you to Wilkes Land and Terra del Fuego. And the route that we're on, which is the oldest and most legendary route, the Drake Passage.
We continue our route south, accompanied by a ballet of albatross and petrels. Halfway across Drake Passage, we encounter Jean-Louis Etienne's former vessel. It has been rechristened the Tara and is on its way home from an expedition in the Antarctic Peninsula.
This part of the world is really quite difficult to handle in terms of pure navigation. Drake Passage is notorious for its difficult sailing. You saw yourself the weather is really unpredictable. We can get 2 or 3 different weather forecasts in a single day. Low-pressure systems come through here all the time. It's notorious in the world of sailing for its difficulties.
Towards the middle of the day, we catch sight of the South Shetland Islands emerging from the fog.
A trip to Antarctica is really a special experience because it's the last continent. We are following the route of the famous explorers. You have to be very alert, very careful of the ice, and follow the advice of the ice masters, the ice pilots that are on board with us. It's the most exciting sort of navigation because you get a rush of adrenaline maneuvering in these waters.
As we near the islands, we run into a flock of penguins busy fishing. The first discovery that we make is that these birds, so clumsy and awkward on land, are swift, leaping swimmers in the water. We've almost reached our first destination. It's time for Marie to go over the guidelines laid down by the IATO to protect the environment.
The tour operators have agreed to respect this Antarctica Visitors Charter in order to avoid the risk of damaging the very fragile ecosystem. So, keep Antarctica intact. Don't throw away any litter, no orange peels, no banana skins, things like that. There's no eating, no smoking either in the Zodiac or on shore. For reasons of hygiene, we'll clean our boots so as to avoid the risk of bringing any germs or bacteria from one colony to another, from one landing point to another. So that's what the disinfectant foot bath is for. So you'll be able to disinfect your boots before going ashore.
Our first stop in the South Shetland Islands, Penguin Island. It's obvious why the seal hunters who landed here in 1820 gave this name to the island. And even though we have a welcoming committee of fur seals today, their presence on the shore makes our landing a bit tricky.
IATO is really concerned with protecting the integrity of nesting penguins, sea lions, fur seals, and to make sure that the nesting areas are not impacted at all. We are also real interested in making sure that you maintain a safe distance from the wildlife so that you do not disrupt their natural behavior, whether they be nesting or just moving around. The biggest risk, obviously, is impacts that can take for many generations to overcome. We are also real concerned at IATO about making sure that you don't pick up any rocks or any feathers or bones. You take nothing from Antarctica and leave only footprints.
Unlike the Arctic, which is a region of ice surrounded by continents, Antarctica is a continent surrounded by ice. To understand how this phenomenon came about, we have to go back 2 million years, when all the Earth's land was grouped in the southern hemisphere in a supercontinent, Gondwana. Over the course of millions of years, Gondwana broke up into the continents which began to drift, leaving Antarctica isolated. This activity of the Earth's crust explains why there are so many volcanoes in Antarctica. With the coming of spring, the chin-strap penguins, with their characteristic narrow black band running from one ear to the other, are returning to Antarctica. Jumping from rock to rock, they make their way up the rocky slopes, their favorite nesting place. During the winter, when the ice field blocks the shores of the Antarctic Peninsula, they swim north, covering several hundred kilometers to find their food, which is krill, small shrimp, that can be found only in ice-free waters.
We are looking at some Antarctic fur seals here, and these are the only eared seals of the Antarctic Peninsula region. And this was the animal that caused the discovery of this part of Antarctica. The fur seal hunters came here in the 1820s. So what they're doing here is, these are all males, and the breeding season is finished for the year, and that means all of these males are now finished breeding and they are taking a vacation here on this island. So they are tired of being around all the females and all the babies, and they're having a vacation here. They're just resting.
We leave Penguin Island and continue on our journey. As we sail along the South Shetland Islands, we run into some icebergs. Visibility is good, there's no problem on the radar screen, and yet our ice pilot, who's celebrating his 100th cruise to Antarctica this week, knows that you always have to stay alert.
I'm, as ice master, advising and giving assistance to the ship's command, especially to the captain and the officers on watch, where to go, where to anchor, how to go between pack ice, how to navigate between icebergs, especially tabular icebergs from the shelf, which are in these waters, and it's the most difficult navigation area on Earth. I never learned one word in the Nautical Academy about navigating in Antarctica because the teachers never have been there. And there are no books existing in general how to navigate in this water. So I came 1977. Every year I made between 6 and 7 voyages, expedition voyages to Antarctica. And finally, so after the 3rd year or 4th year, I fell in love with the country.
The weather is quite unpredictable in Antarctica. All of a sudden, the bright sunny sky becomes overcast with heavy gray clouds. After a few hours at sea, we come into view of mysterious Deception Island, with its spur-covered summit that every now and again emerges from the fog. Entering into the extinct volcano's caldera, we're struck by a landscape that looks like something straight out of Jules Verne. On the shore of this mysterious island, we behold a group of strange rusted metal structures from a bygone age, and yet they are surprisingly futuristic. Who constructed all this, and for what purpose? What catastrophe resulted in this scene of desolation?
It was known first in the 1820s because of the sealing that was done here, and then in the early 1900s it was a whaling base. And they developed, originally they brought ships in here and had floating factories on the water. Later on, that was so inefficient, they developed a shore-based facility. That allowed them to render more of the whale products down to oil and to plant or animal feed and that kind of thing.
Thousands of whales were killed and cut up on Deception Island. This is a photo taken on South Georgia, another archipelago in the Antarctic region where the same sort of butchery went on. It was finally the advent of factory ships in the 1930s that sounded the death knell of this Norwegian whaling station on Deception Island. The rusted boilers that were used to melt down the whale blubber into oil are no more than a ghostly testimony to an industry that, fortunately, is now a thing of the past. For years, the wind and the birds were the only ones here to comfort and heal this ravaged island. But with the end of the Second World War, the English, the Chileans, and the Argentines vie for possession of the island, and each one sets up their own weather station. Then, as if nature wanted to reclaim its own, the volcano erupts in 1969. The bases are destroyed, and the island is abandoned. They all agreed to make Antarctica the last wholly protected natural region of the planet. This stopover at Deception Island has merely confirmed our conviction that man is the most dangerous of predators. And in the centuries to come, Antarctica should continue to be wary of him. We leave the South Shetland Islands, and during the night, head for the Antarctic Peninsula.
Nothing to start. Nothing to start.
Early in the morning, we discover a new world. Snow-covered peaks, gigantic glaciers. Antarctica is there before our eyes. Glacial, but magnificent.
We are in the Palmer Archipelago, which is a small group of islands just off the Antarctic Peninsula. And we are in the Neumayer Channel, a very narrow channel with high, steep mountains on either side and lots of glaciers. From the ship today, we're seeing mostly these glaciers here that are called fringing glaciers, meaning that they're like aprons on the sides of the mountains. They do calve off occasional small icebergs, very small. Occasionally we see larger icebergs in here that actually come down from further northeast of here, out of the Weddell Sea, much bigger icebergs. The main explorer in this area was a man named Adrien Gerlache, and he was a Belgian who explored in here in 1897 to 99, and he put many of the place names on this area. It was the first scientific expedition down to the Antarctic Peninsula area.
Young Roald Amundsen, the future conqueror of the South Pole, took part in that expedition, during which Gerlache took some of the first photos of Antarctica. But they had set out too late in the season, and his ship, the Belgica, gets trapped in the pack ice for a year and drifts several hundred kilometers. Jean-Baptiste Charcot, who was known as the Gentleman of the Seas, left his mark on the history of Antarctica. On January 26, 1904, he sets out from Ushuaia on Le Français, on his first expedition. After a long and difficult voyage down the Antarctic Peninsula, he decides to winter in a cove that now bears the name of Port Charcot. There, he carries out a number of scientific studies on the Antarctic habitat. In particular, he does a study of the behavior of the Gentoo and Adélie penguins. A little later in the morning, we meet the American icebreaker Lawrence M. Gould, which is bringing fresh supplies to Palmer Station, situated in the south of Anvers Island. The information we receive from the bridge of the icebreaker is not very promising. For the moment, the Le Maire Channel, which we were hoping to take tomorrow, is completely blocked by ice. While we're waiting, our boat has dropped anchor before the English base of Port Lockroy. It really should be pronounced Lockroy, for it was Jean-Baptiste Charcot who discovered the site in February 1904 and named it after the vice president of the French House of Representatives, Edouard Lockroy, to thank him for his help and support for the expedition. Well before the English, the French, or even the whalers, the first and only true natives of this site have been the Gentoo penguins. There are so many Gentoos that the base sometimes looks like a besieged encampment, even with the Union Jack flying from its roof. And in fact, the English surrendered. They closed the base in 1962. It was not until 1994 that it reopened as an Antarctic exploration museum.
This place, Base A, the first British station on the peninsula, was started in 1944 as part of a secret naval operation called Operation Tabarin. It was again a three-pronged project. They were looking to set up a station down here for meteorology and radio monitoring, secondly for science. Thirdly, also, there were some naval operations during the war down here. There were battles off the Falkland Islands. There was a thought that some shipping might be, or battleships or something, might be hiding in the Northern Islands waiting to raid the convoys coming out of South America. They felt at the time might make a difference to the war effort. Personally, I don't believe it had any effect whatsoever.
We could go on watching these penguins forever. There are so many of them that they all look the same, whereas they are in fact all different. We can see why Marie has such a passion for these very special birds.
During the trip, we'll be seeing basically 3 types of penguin. Today it'll be the gentoo penguins with their little white patch and their red beak. On the first day, we saw chinstrap penguins, and their name really fits them on account of the dark line on their neck. And tomorrow we'll start seeing Adelaide penguins. Each type of penguin has its own specific character. The chinstraps tend to be rather aggressive, and they're not as numerous. The gentoos are more placid and live together in large colonies. Now, within the same species of penguin, you can have good parents and bad parents, quarrelsome parents. There are those who have no qualms about stealing pebbles from the neighbor's nest and bringing them back to their own. You have all the possible cases. It's a veritable miniature community, a sort of caricature of the human community. Penguins have never been hunted by man very much because there have never been any men here. The only men that live here on a semi-permanent basis are scientists, and they have very good reasons to respect the penguins. The only cases of penguins being hunted were by certain explorers, so it was very sporadic, at a specific period in a specific place. So they don't have any natural defenses in their genes against Homo sapiens.
We've once again taken up our voyage on the Neumayer Channel. The captain's goal is to take the boat as far as possible, but the weather forecast is not very promising. We progress with extreme caution. The mass of growlers, which are small blocks of ice drifting on the surface of the water, is getting more and more dense. Up on the bridge, the air is heavy with tension.
We're approaching the entrance of the Le Maire Channel, and just ahead of our coastline we have a stripe, or so-called belt, drifting by the wind. It's also frozen sea water. Now I'm looking where's a chance to push. What is the easiest to push through? Between these little ones, the two. Yeah. Starboard, starboard. Yes.
So the one we keep on. Because it's full of ice here.
Yeah. Stop engine and call your master the belt ahead.
We had come down south through the Neumayer Channel, and we're heading forward towards the Le Maire Channel, one of the most photographic, scenic places in all of Antarctica. Reports had been of heavy ice the last few days, but we'd had no reports since yesterday. So we wanted to come down, take a look, see the ice situation for ourselves. As you can see, we've had rather extensive ice for this ship. And you realize we're not going to make it to the Le Maire. So we made the executive decision to head back north for Paradise Bay and Nico Harbor and try and give our passengers some scenic cruising and then a landing, continental landing at Nico Harbor later in the day.
Once we turn around and head north, the water is ice-free and it's clear sailing. The sun breaks through the clouds and offers us a breathtaking landscape. Feasting our eyes on such a sight, we quickly forget our disappointment at not having reached Le Maire Channel. Nico Harbor is a fantastic place, but the terrain has to be marked out very strictly. The paths that the passengers take must in no case impede the penguins as they advance towards the sea.
There are 3 spots: the hut, on top of the hill, and over there the point with the cormorants.
Now, when they go up here, you got groups of penguins on this side, groups of penguins on that side.
Yeah.
This swale right between the rocks, that's the best way, safest way up, and it's away from the penguins the most. That's the way up. We don't want them climbing up into groups of penguins, of course.
Okay.
Nico Harbor is the ideal place to observe a number of species of seals up close. Some are quite placid, like the Weddell seal, whose diet consists mainly of fish and shellfish. Others, like the leopard seal, are truly wild beasts. With its powerful jaw, armed with incisors, it can attack penguins as well as other seals. Antarctica is the largest reserve of fresh water on Earth. So the subject on everybody's mind is the problem of global warming and the melting of the ice caps. But first, a very simple question. Why is ice blue?
All water is blue. But normally it's a very weak reflection, and normally there are other things that interfere with that. For instance, in the ocean, if you go out into the mid-tropical ocean, the water appears quite blue because there's no plankton in it. So there's nothing to discolor it. But generally in these areas, water doesn't appear blue because there's plankton, a lot of krill, and phytoplankton also, the small plant organisms in the water. But actually all ice and all water reflects a very small scattering of the blue wavelengths, so the end of the spectrum. The longer wavelengths are actually absorbed into the ice and they vanish from our eye. But everything else, the little blue-green end of the spectrum, is scattered, and so it comes back into our eye. really where we're learning the most about the ice is in two sources. One is deep ice coring, which means that we drill like we drill for oil, only we drill down through the ice cap. We're getting information maybe on a 10-year basis, several 100,000 years old now. So we can tell what the climate's been many hundreds of thousands of years ago. We can tell within a year, just a few centuries ago, what the ice conditions were. There we have a little rumbling going on, a small amount of caviar.
The swell from these few falling blocks of ice gives us an idea of the size of the wave that would be caused by a truly huge iceberg breaking off the glacier. It's better not to be on the opposite shore, unless you're a seagull and can fly off.
In the Antarctic Peninsula area, which is a very tiny fraction of Antarctica, there's been a slow warming going on here. And so there's some retraction of the glaciers in this area. They're getting a little smaller, but not a great deal. The sea ice is the thing that's most affected right now. There's less sea ice in this region than there was, although we've got a very cold summer this summer, there's plenty of sea ice. So, but in Antarctica in general, actually the scientists believe that the East Antarctic, the main ice dome of Antarctica is growing, in fact, and getting colder.
This day that got off to a worrisome start finishes in a blaze of glory. The rays of the setting sun bathe the mountains and the face of the glaciers lining the Gerlache Strait. As soon as the captain sees the beaming smiles of the passengers that he's meeting with in the salon, he knows that the cruise is a success. Once again, Antarctica has lived up to its promise. In spite of the gray sky and the fog that's blocking the horizon, this last day of sailing along the Antarctic Peninsula still has one more surprise in store for us. For the first time on this trip, we found ourselves sailing in the midst of a sea crowded with table icebergs. These icebergs, with their flat tops and sheer faces, are not chunks of glacier that have toppled into the sea. They come, in fact, from the enormous ice shelf of the Weddell Sea. Pushed by the currents, they break off from the ice shelf, drift, and obstruct the sea lanes north of the peninsula. Some of these icebergs, which are 4/5 submerged, can have a surface of several dozen, even several hundreds of square kilometers. Towards midday, we come into sight of the Argentine Esperanza station. It was in 1903 that Esperanza made its name in history. 3 survivors of the expedition led by the Swede Nordenskjöld, whose boat was crushed by the ice, spent a whole winter in this stone hut before they were rescued. The vehicles parked near the hut are there to commemorate the founding of the base by the Argentines in 1952. Since that date, the Argentines have considered that this is not Antarctica, but is in fact part of Argentina.
Right now, there are 85 people living here on the base. 30 of them are scientists, and the others are military personnel and their families who provide the logistics. The particularity of this base is that we have 9 families with 15 children living here in Antarctica. And that makes for a specific lifestyle, with its own particular activities. We have a school and 2 teachers who came over from Tierra del Fuego, and the children over 12 take classes over the internet.
The first Zodiac dinghies have hardly arrived at the dock when a severe low-pressure zone starts moving into the bay.
We're drifting quite a bit. We have to maneuver right away.
Okay, we'll bring them back.
The depression becomes more and more threatening, so the captain decides to call all the passengers back on board.
We can't maneuver safely where we are right now. There's a lot of drift ice. Icebergs are heading our way. We're drifting in a rather surprising way over the reefs. So we have to be ready to avoid them, to maneuver. And that's what we've been doing for an hour or so. Every 10 minutes we steam forward to be able to keep the boat safe.
We wait an hour and the depression moves off. The passengers can go back ashore without any risk.
For Argentina, signing the Antarctic Treaty means mainly being in agreement with all the other countries that have bases in Antarctica, to give a legal framework to our activity. Following the International Geophysical Year of 1958, Argentina ratified the treaty. Among the countries that signed, 7 of them, Argentina included, have laid claims to territories. Argentina respects all the conditions of the treaty, without, however, relinquishing its claim to sovereignty over this territory.
These funny furry birds, their bodies still covered with clumps of down, are young Adelaide penguins who are finishing their molt. Grouped in a sort of nursery, they make an ideal prey for the skuas. Here we see another illustration of the laws of nature that regulate the duality between the strong and the weak. The skuas are sowing panic. They're usually scavengers, but here they're trying to isolate a weaker or wounded member from the group. The Antarctic Treaty, ratified in 1959, has ensured up to the present the protection of this unique continent. One of its most important principles bans any and all industrial exploitation. But faced with the expansion of our societies, will man be wise enough to spare this continent? The protection of Antarctica, which holds 90% of the planet's stock of fresh water, undoubtedly constitutes the most important challenge of the centuries to come.